start talking about the Scotch Bonnet Marsh Enhancement Project. Before I do that, I want to just remind some of you that may not know about the Wetlands Institute real quick. We've been here for 54 years now, working on appreciation, understanding, and stewardship of our coastal and wetland ecosystems. We do it with research, education, and conservation programs. We have 18-member board of trustees. Some of the trustees are here today. They work tirelessly to keep us on track and on mission. We have 19 full-time staff. We amp up over 35 seasonal staff. We just got today was like the first day that summer nature programs was over, so it's a whole another day here of quiet. We have about 19,000 visitors every year, and the team here works with 14,000 school children. So there's quite a lot of folks that come through here. We're a member-based organization with about 1,300 members. The education programs are typically the way most folks interface with us. We do field trip programs where folks come to us. We go out to kids that can't come here. We also have a program out at sea. We do scouts and homeschool programs to kind of spread that out. Of course, if you come and visit, we have general admission, we have public opportunities. We also have the education intern program. And then, of course, the summer nature programs, which is a really important way for folks to engage. I'm going to focus tonight on some of our research and conservation programs. We really focus on 4 key areas: marsh health and sustainability, which I'll talk about in some detail tonight. We're working on habitat restoration project for coastal birds. Some of you are familiar with those projects. Diamondback terrapins. A lot of folks are aware of the terrapin conservation program here. And then another really incredible program is the Return the Favor horseshoe crab program. And that program now, in the 10 years of its history, has saved more than 1 million horseshoe crabs using volunteers. So really powerful program. And of course, a really important part of what we do at the Institute is provide opportunities for early career engagement and professional development for students. And the Coastal Conservation Research Intern Program is one way we do that, along with the Environmental Education Intern Program. So really incredible programs are really powerful for engaging people. I want to start by talking about the value of coastal wetlands. Many of you know different parts of this. You'll appreciate coastal wetlands. I think you live here, and their recreation and aesthetic beauty that we get from them. But they're also among the most biodiverse ecosystems on Earth. They rival coral reefs and tropical rainforests. We tend not to think about them that way, but they're really incredibly important. They also support fisheries and wildlife. You know that more than 75% of commercial fish and shellfish rely on the marshes for some portion of their life stage. Really important there. And of course the habitat, that we love the birds and all the things we see, waterfowl that are here. They're really important for keeping our waters clean. They filter runoff. But they also store carbon, like 10 times higher than tropical rainforests. So when we think about climate change and carbon sequestration and varying carbon to help with effects of climate change, they're really important in those roles. You say, yeah, so I don't know, not really that big a deal. But what about the protections for our coastal communities? They're incredibly important for our coastal communities. An acre of salt marsh can absorb about 1.5 million gallons of water. When you start thinking about that, we know during storms. We saw during Hurricane Sandy what that means. They absorb floodwaters, and they can absorb wave energy. And there's some stats I pulled from the Pew Trust page that's here. They decrease property damage in adjacent communities by up to 20%. So areas that have nice, strong coastal wetlands back their communities are better protected during storms. On average, they provide close to $700,000 of value per square mile by reducing impacts of storm surge and flooding. And during Sandy, we saw that there was 20 to 30% reduction in storm damage to coastal communities that were backed by wetlands. So how do they do this? I kind of date myself when I give the example of the shag carpet. If I would take a jar of marbles and think about that as the energy of a wave and just dump it out on the table or on the floor, those marbles are going to roll a long way without much slowing them down. If I have a shag carpet, probably I'm kind of eating a pink myself. I take that same jar of marbles and roll them across that shag carpet. Slows them down. So that energy absorption for it to get through the carpet is what the marshes are doing for us. So that dampening the waves a little bit. So they're really important, and so there's a whole bunch of reasons they're important. You pick the reason why you think is most important, but the reality is we're losing acreage. We're losing marshes. About 80,000 acres a year of coastal wetlands are being lost to coastal development and sea level rise. Coastal development, really, this institute was founded to try to slow down coastal development, get people to understand that today, with a lot of the protections that are in place, we're losing more wetlands to sea level rise. And that's what I'm going to focus on today. So how do marshes work? So effectively, marshes are at this incredible balance with tidal waters. They're right there at sea level. If you think about it. Okay, so they're right there. The daily tides come in, they nourish the marshes. Moon tides, we just came out of a big moon tide cycle. In the storm tides, they bring more water up onto the marsh. So on every given day, the water doesn't really come onto the marsh, it just comes up right up to the marsh edge. And then the moon tides, which used to be a couple times a month, you get some of what up onto the marsh. These wetlands occur then over a very narrow elevation range. They're tuned to sea level. That's where they want to be, a very narrow range. And it turns out, over the thousands of years that these marshes have been here, they can keep up, because they can fill vertically to manage the same rate with sea level. But they can only do it over a certain range. So how do they do this? Well, if you walk around on a marsh, they're firm most of the time. And that's the root mat. You have a dense root mat that's building up. And then they trap mud and sediment. You get storms out there. So they build up. But if we get too much flooding in a marsh, they start to grow slower. Think about overwatering your houseplant. You water it just the right amount, it grows really, really great. Start watering it too much, it starts growing slower and slower. We're in a period with some of our marshes now where the flooding is too high, too frequently, too deep, so they're slowing down their growth. Exactly at the time we don't want them to be slowing down, we want them to be growing faster. Too much flooding leads to drowning. Now you say, so, but this has been going on for a long time, right? So marshes can adapt, can't they? Well, they can. And it turns out they want to maintain that balance with sea level, so they walk landwards, higher elevation. They want to maintain that balance. And this is a picture from Highway 47. You've probably all seen this, right? When you're driving up there. These are the ghost forests you read about. So what happens here is the salt water encroached up into the forest edge and killed the trees. So this is the marsh moving up into the forest. It's natural. It's kind of healthy. The problem is our development has prevented and limited how far the marshes can walk. So on the Delaware Bay side, where we have less development, broad marshes, there's more opportunity for those marshes to walk land. Here, we box them in. The Garden State Parkway, right? Drive the Garden State Parkway, you can see the marshes. That's prevented the marshes from migrating landward. Barrier Islands, bulkheaded. So we've kind of boxed in these marshes. They can't go anywhere. The waters are staying. So that's the challenge. So here's the quiz. Get out your notebook. This is sea level rise. This is measured sea level. Okay, we use the Atlantic City gauge because it's a long record. Okay, there's a gauge just like this on the 96th Street Bridge. If you go over the bridge and look down, you can see the station there. There's one there too. Think of it as like the in your gas tank. You got the little float in your gas tank, right? It tells you it. So there's a little float goes up and down and measures the sea level, up and down, all the time. And this is a long record, and it starts all the way in 1910, and here we are today. And you can see it's bouncy, it's noisy, up and down and up and down. But if I take this 100-plus year average, sea level's rising. Measured. New Jersey, unfortunately, the rate of rise in New Jersey is 2 times the global average. For an assortment of reasons. Portions of New Jersey are sinking for a variety of reasons. There's a whole bunch of other factors in play about how water sloshes around in ocean basins. There's a bunch of reasons for this. But the reality is it's faster here. And in the last 100 years, sea level's risen 1.4 feet. Okay, that's just measured sea level. If I look at the long-term average rate, it increased about 4.2 millimeters a year. When I gave this talk a year ago, it was 4.16. So the number keeps going up. And the interesting thing, if I'm moving a 100-year average, that's a big deal. If we focus on the last 15 years, it's at 6 millimeters a year, quarter of an inch a year. It starts to add up. And if it's a marsh out there, this is what the marsh is trying to live with. And you can see how it picked up that number. That is. Okay. It turns out, I said sea level, marshes can keep up with sea level. But it turns out that the rate that they can keep up, that they build up, is about 4 millimeters a year. This is a number that's widely reported, but this is also directly measured by some of the researchers working in the 7 Mile Island Innovation Lab. So build up at 4, sea level's at 6. So we're falling backwards. This is work we did with the University of Pennsylvania with the Environmental Monitoring Lab. And they said, okay, they modeled the marshes. This is Stone Harbor. There's 96, we're sitting right in there. And this is what, in 2020, everything in green there is marsh. And this is taken at mean high water, so at high tide. You think about that, high tide. And this is what it's projected to look like high tide in 2035. Now you've already sort of seen this, right? Those of you who have lived here a long time, you're driving on the roads, right? You're seeing the marsh underwater more and more and more. You say, well, 2035, I'm not going to worry about that. It's happening now. Again, you've seen this. So what does this mean? So we're working very hard to understand what it means for our marshes, and more importantly, what can we do about it? I'm not great on doom and gloom. What if we could change this? And that's what the plan is. Here's what it looks like at the Institute on a sunny day. We're starting to get a little concerned about what's out our back door. So I'm going to kind of roll you through how we see this working. So this is the history. I'm going to go through a series of historical photos, which is the history of marsh evolution and on the property that's the Cape May Coastal Wetlands Wildlife Management Area. We call this area Scotch Bonnet. This is Scotch Bonnet Creek, and we just kind of clip where it closes. So we kind of, some of us call it the horseshoe, but this is Scotch Bonnet Island. And the red star is where the Institute will be in the future. It's not there in the 1956 photo. And this is kind of a cool photo, and you can see, well, there's some dredge material. We just kind of popped up there. Okay, so this is early placement fill, and this is the beginning of filling for what will ultimately all filled here that becomes Stone Harbor Map. Some of you remember when there was the lumberyard down there. So here we are, and what you can see, pay attention to this guy and that guy. They'll be in all the pictures. These are some of these open water pool areas. And when you drive by some, you see all the birds in the pools. That's great. That's where that's a good thing on the marsh sequence. But the rest of this, if I was at the Wetlands Institute then, which isn't there, and I looked out, I would have seen a broad expanse of grasses, of marsh grasses. That's what it would have been. There would have been a couple of little pockets and pools, and there would have been these narrow tidal creeks, really narrow tidal creeks. That's what it looked like. In 1963, now this fill. This is actually the footprint that the Wetlands Institute is on. The Institute was built on fill. It wasn't filled for the Wetlands Institute. And then interestingly, there's a road. Comes down here, goes around, and reconnects to Stone Harbor Boulevard. Who knew that was it? 1963. It turns out my neighbor, who's not with us any longer, came over and knocks on my door one day and says, I hear you're an environmentalist. And he says, I dredged this and built the road here. And he gave me all these stories that appeared to happen between 58 and 59. And it was going to be a development, similar to some of the others, and then it was abandoned. It never got built. But this road, now, we're kind of glad it's there. That's our Salt Marsh Trail and the access we have to Scotch Pond. Okay, so that was built there. But the interesting thing, or maybe not so interesting, they nearly blocked this tidal channel with it. They blocked this tidal channel. They blocked that tidal channel. There's kind of no notion of what that might mean for this marsh. This area along here is going to keep coming up as a really funky area because it started responding because it didn't have good connection anymore. Here's 1970, and now you can see the rest of the fill that came out, the other piece that's along out there where we have trees that you can't see. But you could also see the fill was a while ago, because it's kind of scruffy. I'm guessing if we were out here, it would be kind of shrubby and phragmites, right? You can see that, it's just scruffy. But the other interesting thing, you can see this creek doesn't know what it's doing because it's still blocked. This is all marsh conversion. It went from marsh grass now to open water. And you see, remember these two pools? Now I got pools here. This has now opened itself up and it's coming in here. There's now pools. So when you drive along the boulevard right over there, there's marsh pools. They weren't there in 1963. Notice right here, you know those big pools that are right next to the parking lot? They're not there. Here's 2009. Here's those same two pools, but now look at all of these pools. There's pools here, this pool, this pool along there. The tidal creeks are way bigger, and they're coming in a lot further. So when we talk about marsh converting to open water, this is what we mean. The marsh grasses became pools or just went right to mud flats. This is marsh loss that we see here. Here's where we are today, or 2021. These pools This tidal channel has expanded in and breached into these pools and drained them, and now they're eroding. This whole area is all through here, all these expanded pools, and you can just take a look. All of this open water, there's that one pool that I showed you at the beginning. That's one of the original pools, but all the rest of that open water wasn't here. We've shown that we've lost of this area about a third of the marsh acreage since that 1941, 1956 time frame. So marsh loss from that. So we started to say, okay, well, what about the future? Are we okay? How do we think about what's going forward? So the same group at the EM lab modeled this site. And so this is the existing condition. So when you look at this picture, anything in this light green, that's you. When you think and you look out and you see a marsh, that's what you would see. The darker green is kind of higher marsh, and you can see here, you see patterns, it follows the fill. That's the higher ground. So if I want to find higher marsh, I'm actually, the only places we can find it now is where we had fill. So where in the past people were dredging and filling the marshes wasn't viewed as a good thing. In a lot of ways it wasn't. But that's what's left of high marsh now. So when I look at this whole area, some of this are mud flats, this whole area was about 50% marsh. If I look inside the Scotch Bonnet Island, about 60% is marsh. This is 2050. We projected forward using sea level rise, something about how much the land might sink, how much the marsh could build up. All of those factors were put in, and we used a pretty moderate sea level rise rate. We didn't use an extreme rise rate. And what you see now is all of this brown is projected to be marsh loss. Go from marsh to mud flats, and then even open water. If we zoom into Scotch Bonnet Island, that ratio goes from 60 to about 38%. So we're going to continue to lose marsh, and you can see where we're going to continue to lose marsh is here and here. Remember the shape early on, and when they first put that road in, that kind of messed with this area, and it persists as a low area, and then there's this area. So we look at this and we say, wow, can we do something about that? Can we change that? Can we restore this marsh? Can we bring it back? The answer is yes. That's the plan. So how do we do that? Well, the 7 Mile Island Innovation Lab. I think a lot of you have heard about the 7 Mile Island Innovation Lab. This is where the Army Corps got together. They have a mission to dredge, maintain our waterways, navigable channels. They do that by dredging. What do you do with the material? Anyone else that needs a Stone Harbor needed to dredge, right? The biggest challenge with that is where do you put the material? So the idea was, can we find a way to marry this? Can we use natural and nature-based features to provide coastal resilience, to restore marshes? Can we help these ecosystems as well as our coastal communities? So the idea was the Army Corps got together with the ERDC, is the Army Corps' research arm, New Jersey DEP and Fish and Wildlife got together and said, can we create a place where we can think about this? Can we try things? It's pretty hard to permit putting sediment on the marsh. And that's in fact what happened. So we created this think tank. Those are the key partners. This was 2019. It was the idea is we could create a place where we could try things, we could advance and improve the techniques to do it. You need the engineering behind it. It's pretty hard to, how do you put that material on the marsh? How do you do it appropriately from an ecological perspective? What's the right way to do it? What's the best way to do it? How do we maximize the benefit to the marshes, minimize the impacts that there might be? How do we get long-term benefit to doing this? It's based on an international concept pioneered by the Dutch, right? The Dutch have been doing this stuff for a long time, right? We keep bringing the Dutch over to ask them how do we solve this, right? They've got the little guy with his finger in the dike, right? They solve the problem because they're in a lot more vulnerable position than us. So it was their idea, is to create a place where you have a lot of folks working on these questions, where you're really putting the best science forward, the best engineering and technologies forward to try things. And that's in fact how we've gotten to be able to try some of these projects. So the Innovation Lab is basically everything behind 7 Mile Island. So Townsend's Inlet to Hereford Inlet, from the mainland to the Barrier Island. So all of that marsh, and it's really important for a couple of reasons. First, these kinds of shallow back bay marsh areas are actually prevalent along the entire east coast of the U.S., and then even wrap around into the Gulf of Mexico. So if we could solve some of these problems here, they should be applicable to other places. They're not applicable everywhere. This won't work in San Francisco Bay or in big open bays, right? You need different tools, different toolkits there. But it also has the Intracoastal Waterway running through it. And the value of that, first of all, it brings the Army Corps because they have a mandate to maintain that that waterway, they also bring the resources with the engineering as well as the research on. But also, they have sediment that they need to move. Sediment is the currency of these systems. They need that sediment. That's how we can build up the marsh surface. That's how we can get somewhere. So they have sediment they need to move. The state has a ton of land that are vulnerable marshes that they're really concerned about. We had some of the expertise we could bring to the table and also partner with other folks to bring more expertise to the table. There's a 50-member working group where we try to communicate what we're learning, and there's more than 30 scientists actively working in SNIL on all kinds of different projects and all kinds of different backgrounds. So how does this work? So under an ideal condition, this is sort of what a marsh looks like. Okay, the blue line is kind of your everyday tides, and the light blue is kind of high tide, low tide, or the storm tides. And remember, I told you, it's at sea level, so it intersects. There might be some interior tidal channels, maybe a little pool or two. What's happening now is there's too much water. Okay, so it's drowning. The water's up on the marsh too frequently. That's where we are. So how does this work? Well, the idea is, can we elevate the marsh surface so that we reset that elevation so the water levels look like the healthy marsh? That's it in a nutshell. That's what we're trying to do. Bring the marsh back up to reestablish the flooding frequency that the grasses need to survive. And we do that by bringing in sediment. Clean, chemically clean, tested, dredge material from the dredging the channels, bring it in, stack it on the marshes. Sounds easier than it is, but that's the idea. And then when we do this, the water levels are right. Doesn't look great. Don't look like a big old muddy mess out there. Until it sort of settles out, gets established, and then through time, the marsh grasses come back in. If we get the elevations right, the grasses come in on their own. And they'll reestablish that surface. But this surface is now where it needs to be relative to sea level. So it resets it. That's the whole premise of how this is going to work. So we've done this quite a bit. This is the good news. We've already completed 9 projects since 2014. There's been more than 85 acres restored so far, and all of these are different project pieces. A couple of them, these down here, were the first ones we did to create nesting habitat. Those were sandy. Those weren't really to create marsh, but that was, again, replacing lost habitat. All the rest of these around gull and sturgeon, there's the intercoastal waterway. You start seeing a pattern, right? You can't transport the material super far, so where we have the material available, we then go and try to figure out where the marsh needs it the most. So it's a marriage. We have to have ecological need. We have to have the marsh need drives this, and we pair it with where there happens to be material available, the right kind of material that we can use on the marsh surface. So the new projects that we're planning in 24 and now in winter 25 should bring this acreage up over 100 acres. There's been millions of investment in these marshes by these agencies to try to help. We're all the beneficiaries of this, and New Jersey is now a national leader in nature-based solutions because of this work. This is what it looks like. This is Sturgeon Island. The Institute actually owns Sturgeon Island. This is a project we did in 2020, and this is what it looks like right after it. That surface is 2+ feet, 2.5 feet higher than it was at the start. This is 2 years later. There's Angie up there. So, took two years for the grasses to start coming in. We've offset sea level rise by more than 100 years. It doesn't look good. Got to be patient. That's Sturgeon Island. Here's Gull Island. That's Lisa. Research out there. So right afterwards, doesn't look great. It's muddy. We're really good now at walking in. We learn a lot about quicksand and how to navigate, where to go and not go, and how you really can't actually sink in quicksand is a really take-home message for me. This is November 2020. Sorry, that's there. Here it is 2 years later. You can see the grass is coming in. Here it is just a few weeks ago. So it takes time. We don't expect it to be all the same because marshes have variability. They've got different levels. We want some of those little pools. We want some little bare areas. We want some areas a little higher, a little bit lower. That variability that was part of the marshes that we're losing as they drown. So this is what it looks like, but it does take time. And things are different when it's here. Obviously, there's wildlife that would have been using it that aren't. But there's also different wildlife that are using it through the different transitions. Here's another spot on Gull Island. Again, this is 2021. This is a big, large, open interior flat, and there it was just a few weeks ago. So these grasses, they came in on their own. There's plenty of seed bank there for the Spartina. If we want other kinds of vegetation, maybe we need to bring that in, right? This is part of how we continue to learn. Each one of these projects, we can learn something about it and continue to apply that, those learning tools, adaptively managing. What will we do? How does it all work? But that's the way it works on Gull Island. Okay, so what are we going to do here? So with all of that knowledge that we've learned, and really it was me walking around on these project sites going, man, this really needs help. And then we walk around here and go, wait a minute, we need it here. This marsh is really, really hurting. So the goal is really to reestablish a healthy marsh, to stop that loss of marsh that is happening out there. So we're trying to increase the marsh elevation in this circle area. Remember, this area was really low on that. We saw that was projected to be an area of loss. So that's why we went here. It's very low. We're trying to bring this up. We're guessing 2, maybe 3 feet. We're still working on that detail. How much material we can get there. The reality is, how much material do we have? How high can we get? How high can we get it to be? We're trying to increase the marsh acreage in these areas to try to offset some of that loss and then get some acreage back. Again, this is an area just down over here. The timeline, we're thinking it'll start revegetating in 2 years, but it could take up to 5 years before we have good vegetative cover out there. And again, in the middle, if we decide we need to do something, maybe we'll decide we want to plant something. That's all possible as we go forward. This is what it looks like from the air. It's really going to focus over here more in this, but you can get an idea how much open area. Here in green, this is an elevation map, courtesy of our friends at the Army Corps who got the elevations for us. The dark green, everything in dark green, we think is too low to be healthy marsh. So that's why we're focused here initially. The property, as I mentioned, is owned by New Jersey DEP. It's mostly in the Cape May Coastal Wetlands Wildlife Management Area, and we're focusing in the lowest area. Here's Stone Harbor Boulevard. You will be able to see it from the boulevard. Right? So this is going to be part of your new landscape when you drive by here. Once this gets going, this is what you'll see for a few years. But you'll be excited, right? Yeah. I'll call you when you're not so excited. So how are we doing that? So this is a project of the U.S. Army Corps of Philadelphia Districts, part of their maintenance dredging the Intracoastal Waterway. This is the dredging area. How many of you have run aground there? No. All right. Anyway, so there's 2 shoals here. This is a sandy shoal, and then this one you take the Den by Nummy Island. This is a real shallow area. So the sediment's going to come from these 2 areas. They actually bring it up by pipeline all the way up to here. The dredge is the Fullerton. Actually, about a week and a half ago, the Fullerton went north through here, heading north. It's coming. That's the dredge that'll be coming back south. Andy was there. We saw it. Waved to the guys. We're looking at late September to start doing some of the initial work. We expect the dredge to be on site probably the first week in October. We're expecting it to last for about 6 to 8 weeks. Weather dependent. Everything's going to go great and we'll slow down. That is the dredge. I'll be here. How do we do it? So it's a hydraulic pipeline dredge. We're looking to move about 25,000 cubic yards of material. That's how much is in those channels to move it out. They'll pipe it up here. This is what it looks like. I don't know if we're going to spray it that way or lower it down. That's we have to decide all of that. But that's typically what it looks. This is what it looks like at Gull Island. We were spraying at Gull Island. And then the other thing we'll do is we use coconut fiber, basically mats, logs, and we'll use that to kind of direct where the water goes. This slurry is about 80% water, 20% sand and mud, which you really can't move it. So there's a lot of water that moves around. So what we want to do is make sure it goes to the low area, right? We want it to go where we want it and not in other places. So we'll use that to kind of direct the flows. We're not going to contain the flows, kind of direct them to the low area. It's going to try to go there, hopefully, anyway. But this is just kind of directional pieces. So that'll be something like around here. So you'll see some of that coming in first before the rest of the pieces come together.
How are they moved? By a dredge, I guess?
The pipeline. There'll be a floating pipeline. So the dredge pumps them, big dredge pump, sucks it all up, sucks the mud off the bottom into the channel, into the pipeline, and shoots it up there. There's enough pressure on it. The coconut fiber, they don't move. Those will be set. Yeah, no, those will be set, and then they biodegrade. We've learned about 3 years or so.
Oh.
They'll just disappear. And if we need to go pull out the stakes, we'll do that. The stakes usually last longer than the fiber logs. No, they're intended to stay there so that they'll hold. And if we find out there's a reason we want to take them out, we'll do it, but they're not easy to take out. They're waterlogged. And, yeah. So there's a ton of work, as I said, going on here. There's a lot of work happening in advance of this to help design and plan it. The entire research team's been out doing different things from here. This is a group from Villanova, and Erdek has been out here. These are some of our team. This is a drone that we've been out flying. UPenn's out. The Naval Academy has this cool gizmo they drive around. They'll actually be here on Monday setting up some more instrumentation. So just a lot of work happening here. It's going to be a very well-studied project. There's a commitment to continuing the research and tech transfer throughout this process. The education team is working on materials for public communications to teach people about what's happening. We're expecting to have opportunity. You won't be able to go out there. It's a construction site, but we'll have opportunities. We'll lead some tours and talks about it so you can see it from a distance, to hear about it and see what's happening as it's going. And then we'll be monitoring through the recovery time and how the marsh responds to that. And if we need to do any adaptive management, we'll be working on that as well. So with that, I'm happy to take questions. You can reach to me or Tyler. If you want to hit that QR code, we have all three organizations have a website for this. This will take you straight to a website specifically to Scotch Bonnet. There's a whole bunch. There's video there. There's a lot of information there, and we'll use this website as an opportunity. As things happen, we'll keep updating what's happening, so you can be checking in, so it's not static. Yeah.
What's the status or the role of the certified depository sites we have?
You're talking about that Nummy Island?
Yeah.
So what he's asking about is that most of you have seen the big trapezoidal islands that are out there. Those are confined disposal facilities, is what the actual term is. So this is the old way of doing things, right? When we took the dredge material and put it into one of those places, and there it sits. So that material isn't benefiting the marshes in any way. Most of the CDFs right now are full and need to be emptied. Two of them have roads that go out to them. The one on Gavin's Island on Avalon Boulevard has an opportunity to take material off of that, and so does Ocean City does as well. They're expensive and difficult to access. You can't access Nummy Island. Nummy Island is incredibly expensive to get material out. So there's a lot of discussion about how for some of them to take the material out and not use them again in other places. They are going to be needed because of the type of material. If you have any contaminated material, some of that needs to go somewhere you don't want to take it out. So it really depends on what the community is, what the status is, but I know there's not a plan to do anything with Nummy Island. The capacity at Nummy Island, just so is only about 20,000 cubic yards. So, and it's quite a bit. The other reason they're not awesome is because you spend about the same amount of money to empty them before you could fill them to empty them again versus handling the material once, and also the benefit of using it.
So it was a bad plan.
But it was
At the time.
It was the plan at the time, and now it's becoming a bad plan.
Yeah.
I have two questions. One is the actual growth of the grasses from the plants that are there now and covered, or are you seeding on top of them?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Mud.
Yeah, so what we found is, so there's two thoughts. The original plan for this was called thin layer placement, and the idea was you put the mud down thin enough that the grasses would go through. It turns out that really rarely happens, and it has to be incredibly thin. And the thing about that is, if any of these projects, this is a disturbance, right? This is a big disturbance to the marsh. So it doesn't seem logical, aside from forget the cost factors, but from an ecological perspective, it doesn't seem logical to knock down and really impact the marsh and not get the benefit of elevating it up. So our theory that is go big, go thick, reset that marsh for a long time. And in that scenario, what we've seen in all these is it's grass growing over, it's new grass coming in. And actually right here, this picture, I don't know if you can see it, this is a new grass seedling, and it doesn't have roots from below. So we started digging them up. So they're seeded. So when the tide comes up, right now the grasses are all in seed, right? The Spartina, that seed just washes all around. So it gets naturally planted there and grows. At some of the very, very thin edges, maybe some will grow through or grow in from the sides. That happens too. But the vast majority of it, from our experience on the projects we've done, is it's seed bank that comes in and reseeds from the top.
So, auxiliary question. So the new roots from the new seedlings then are creating new.
That's exactly right. And they're creating a new marsh surface and then working and building up from there.
My second question is, you're doing 100 acres in that kind of square area that's around with the road.
Mhm.
Does that expand, or does it when it's raised, does it stay where it, you put it and?
So is the marsh expanding or is the sediment moving? What are you
Right.
asking? Is the marsh expanding or is the sediment moving? I'm not sure which one you're asking.
Well, the question is, once you raise the marsh a little bit, is there trapping of sediment around that over time, or is it just?
Yeah, so sometimes, the sediment does move around for a little bit. That's why it has to kind of get settled. And once it starts getting vegetated, it stops moving around. But it will move around some, and in some ways that's helpful because Mother Nature kind of knows where it needs to go, right? We put it where we think it needs to go, but then when the water comes up and storms, it'll move it around some, and it'll level it out. It'll fill in the low areas. It'll go where it wants to go. So there's a period of resetting for that first several months where it's kind of moving about and doing its thing. But once it starts setting, a few months, it doesn't move very much. Maybe some storms will flip it a little bit off the top. But that happens naturally anyway.
And so the areas outside of this 100 acres then remains low.
They'll remain low. Some of it'll spread a little bit outside that, but yeah. So the key is how much can you do, right? You're getting to how much can you gear up? How much can you do? And that's a great question. Some people say, well, why? How do you make this a much bigger thing? And I'm going to say two parts to it. There are much bigger projects being done, typically by the Army Corps, where they have a huge amount of sediment to dredge. The wind port, right? And that's another big project of the state. They did 800,000 cubic yards of material to build up Abbott's Meadow. That was just completely, it was pretty much lost. It used to be hay farm, extremely low. It was just all mud flat. And they put 800,000 cubic yards of material, and they could take more. So that's a huge project there. Was that 300 acres? 365. So that's a big, but that's all the material that's coming from the deep water port for the wind port up by the PSE&G property. So there are big projects when you have a lot of material. If you're dredging, if you're dredging a port of Baltimore, they built a giant island called Swan Island. So there are huge projects that are trying to do this. The interesting thing from my perspective is we're trying to provide a solution set for these smaller shoals. The Intracoastal Waterway, the state channels. I think the Intracoastal Waterway is an interstate highway. There's a state highways that are the state channels, and then there's even the county roads, right? Stone Harbor has them. So those are much smaller volumes, and they're just as important because if you can't get your boat past Nome Island, which it's getting to be that shallow, then you can't access the rest of the highway. So there are small shoals, and you need small solutions for some of those places. So we're trying to marry this all together. There's a lot of need out there. There is a lot of waterway. I mean, there's 117 miles of Intracoastal Waterway in New Jersey. So there's a lot of material available. There's a big study right now where they're trying to sort of already decided there's not enough material to save all the marshes. So how do you use it the best way? And the answer is, well, if you can manage it to keep it local, keep it in the system, and you really can't transport it very far. So these are local projects associated with local dredging projects. Right now, it's been the Army Corps that we're trying to get. The state's done a couple of projects, and that's why partnering with the state is going to be really important because the state owns a lot of these marshes, and they're the stewards of them. So they're very interested, and that's why they've been such great partners on this. Learn how to do it really well. How do we guide them? How do they know good projects? We got to make sure we do the right thing for the marshes too. We don't want to just get willy nilly out there either.
A question: the borough, is really trying to concentrate on coming up with a more sustainable plan for basin dredging, and it feels like this would be a more cost-effective way to do that. And is that material? Do we have any idea if that's going to be usable, or I mean, I know that's completely theoretical.
No, it's not. It's not completely. So when the borough dredged in 2017, that was about 100,000 cubic yards of material. Only one of the basins at that point in time was not suitable for this. because of, historic contamination that we're not gonna wanna put that into the ecosystem. So the rest of it would have been available. Of course, in 2017, this wasn't really doable. There was one project that started in 2014 that was really still very experimental. So, and then part of the challenges of getting these things permitted is why the 7 mile was created. So those are more viable options. We're trying to get the costs down to make them. In some of these projects, we are on par with what it would cost to truck it off. So, and that's the key, right? It has to be economically viable. It has to be predictably able to permit. So we're getting really close to that, and I think there's some interest in that. Avalon is clearly moving towards that, identifying places. The idea is to identify ecological places where it matters, where you can help the marshes, know where those are, have the information you need, because you have to have the background info. You got to be ready to go. In some ways, it's easier to just say, well, I'm going to take it and truck it off to wherever. So there's some certainty in that, and that's the problem, right? It's some people say, well, we can't figure all this out. So we're trying to get to advanced planning, figure out when you're going to need to dredge, where are the possibilities, make partnerships with the state if you need that. Because do you have land that you own as a municipality? Can you have a partnership with the state? If you don't, and getting that organized so that when you do need to dredge, you're ready to go to those sites. So that's and frankly, DEP. I'm not going to talk to DEP, but I'm going to talk to DEP. They are pushing in the new permitting language that you really have to look first to these projects and not truck it off.
How were those 2 sites to dredge chosen? The 2 circles that you had.
So
those 2
the Army Corps survey crews, they go out and they maintain, they manage, they monitor the depth in the channel. So there's an authorized depth that they can be at. There's supposed to be a certain width and a certain depth. And if it gets shallower than that, they got to get in. They try to get ahead of it before it's too shallow. So it's maintenance dredging. It's identifying, navigation challenges, and that's where they go. And then you got to have a place to put it, right? So for a long time, football field wasn't dredged because there was no place to put the material.
If somebody runs a boat back in there, there's tremendous need for clearing, and especially when the tides are low. I mean, just yesterday, there was a boat stranded right near one of those circles, and I felt bad for the guy because the tide was going down, so he's going to be there for 4 or 5 hours.
Lois looks out from her house and chuckles.
We can
she
see
has
it
last
every
week.
day.
So
no, we know that's why So the interesting thing is how do you get ahead of it, right?
Yeah.
It's already too shallow, but there's so much need and there's so much dredging need that you got to kind of go in order. But yeah, that's how that was. How was that selected? Against an authorized channel depth. Yeah.
So the term innovation lab kind of implies to me experimental. What's the confidence level? And experiment to raise the level of the marshes. What's the confidence level that you have that this will actually be long-term successful? And what's the basis of the confidence?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. So we've done 9 projects so far, and let's say 7 of them have been specifically to try to enhance marshes. All of them have revegetated. They look like marsh. There's a lot more to being a marsh than just looking like a marsh in terms of marsh function and other things that we expect are going to take longer, right? If it's a 5,000-year-old marsh, we put mud on it, try to reestablish a marsh, it's not going to be the same marsh. So it depends on how you judge success, right? And on the scientific spectrum, there's a whole lot of that. It's experimental in the sense that other folks are doing this, so we have a pretty good idea. Some of the experimentation comes into what can you do? Do you need to contain? There's a lot of detailed questions that we're experimenting with to try to get to tools that are replicable outside of an experimental study. Some of the nozzles, the way we spray material, the way you slow down the material, the way you contain it or don't contain it. A lot of the tools they were actually developed for these projects here. So that technology is being created here and exported out. One of the tools that we tested on Sturgeon Island was actually borrowed from an agricultural application. We actually took one and said, one of the challenges, the flow comes out so hard, it's like a fire hose. How do you manage that? How do you slow that down? These are water management projects, and then you got to figure out how to get the sediment to stay. So those are where a lot of the experiments are, and then there's a lot of the ecological work on the backside. Some of the projects, they need longer. I can't answer that, but I could say they don't look like anything is bad, to the extent that that counts. But I showed you Skull and Sturgeon Island, right? They're 2.5 feet higher, and they're revegetated, and there's wildlife using them. So that marsh function is there. Certainly from a resilience perspective, that worked, right? It is 2.5 feet higher. So it depends on how you want to define success and what your metrics are. We built a berm to intersect waves on the south side of Gull Island. You've seen the blocks of marsh just falling in the water from boat wakes, we think that's part of the way the marshes are defining. So we built a berm against it, so the waves are breaking against that. That whole edge is holding really well. Nobody's done that. We were told you can't pump mud underwater and it'll stay there. Well, it did. We just literally published a paper on it. It came out 2 days ago. So that was a success. So now we're going to go back and experiment some more on that. So it's a broad question. And I think the key for me is we're losing our marshes. We're losing fast. So I feel like we have to do something. That's my answer there. I mean, I could study it for another 10 years, but we're losing ground fast. It's important ground. Yeah.
The 2.5 feet that you were able to put out on that, how much of that you paid that from? How much of that fiber to it?
Yeah, so that's another good question. So think about the marsh as kind of a mattress. We put all this weight on the mattress. So we actually built up almost 3.5 feet to get down 2 feet. So some of it, the mattress sinks, and some of the material moves off. But seems pretty stable. Sturgeon's pretty stable right now. It hasn't really moved in the 4 years. It moved the first 2 years, and now it's kind of stopped. It depends on what's underneath you.
The movement, that resetting period you're talking about, do you have a sense that stays in the terrestrial portion of the system, or is that material lost back?
Both. We've actually measured it. Huge study on Gull Island. Army Corps did a huge study looking at how much material was leaving, when it was moving, which way it was going, and what that reset period was. Yeah.
So if you establish the success that you were just talking about, say you get a pretty good track record, and you made some comments regarding availability of material. It seems like there's stuff out there. So to me, as you check those boxes, the box that's going to come up at you very quickly, and you kind of already referenced it, is the cost box. So maybe this is a little bit more for the Army Corps, but are there plans or maybe something already in work to attack this as a cost basis from an engineering vantage point? Where are the big cost factors and what do we need to do to get those cost factors down?
Yeah, that happens in every project, and the Army Corps, the federal government in general, has something called federal standard. And for a project to be done, it has to be cost effective. So these projects are there in terms of that. Where we get the added costs is all the other research we try to do to make sure we can ensure success so we can do the best project. But the specific project, the permit requirements now are we've shown you don't need so some of the work we're talking about success, we monitored the turbidity, because there's a big concern, right? There's rules about turbidity. You can't have mud going off the island and causing impacts to shellfish beds or fisheries or other things. So one of the big projects, we spent a lot of money documenting, the Army Corps did a lot of this work, documenting what the turbidity is. We didn't find it. We showed it wasn't a problem. We showed that the benthic community that got smothered came back within a year. So all this work goes on to show that, and that's where the costs are coming in, because the actual dredging and management and the requirements for permit management are now down for many of these projects. Depends on the project, but for many of these projects are now pretty much on par with what it would take to dredge, put it in a truck it out. And then if you have to handle the material more than once.
I'm just thinking from the long term, and unfortunately my business background in engineering, where if you prove something scientifically, then you just come out of the woodwork because I got to drive the cost down, like, because all this money comes from taxpayers' dollars. And it's just like when we rebuild the beaches, technology works, but the money pipeline is going to dry up at some point. thing ultimately that may hit us, the wall, there's money coming up. So,
So I think the good news from that perspective, I agree with you. So every step of the way, cost has been part of this. Cost has been the factor in it because we have to keep it down. That's why one of the things, the first project that was done was crazy expensive because one of the requirements that came from the regulatory agencies, we had to, the material couldn't go in, it had to go right there, couldn't leave there, had to go right there. So there was all this money spent on containment. Got to keep it right there. Well, they did that. It cost them a fortune. Then we find out, wow, the tides aren't getting in and out. So the system never recovered. And all kinds of bad things happened in terms, not super bad, but the weird chemistry going on, some of the grasses that weren't impacted started dying. What do we do? It's the first project, right? So the regulatory agency was concerned, their job is to protect their surrounding marsh. They're taking a risk by doing this, right? It's fair. There's no criticism here. This is the learning curve of what we start. So they said, okay, we got to take the containment out to let the tides get in. They took the containment out. He's right there. He took the containment out. And then the tides got in, and then gradually the system reset, and now it looks really good. But it was that effort in studying that, and I did the water chemistry work on that showed what happened, and other people looked at how the benthic communities and the fisheries, and all that work came in, and now the next project at Gull Island, they said, you know what? Let's not do that. But now, oh wait, if we don't do that, are we worried about the turbidity? Are we worried about killing the fish? That's going to move everywhere else. So we studied that. And now we should look, that wasn't a problem. So now the agencies are more comfortable in saying, okay, so we say, what are your questions? What are your concerns? And we go study. And then we go to the next one. And if it is a problem, well, now we know we got to work on it. If it's not a problem, if it's an unjustified cost, then we don't need to do that. So everybody's always asking, everyone has their lens, right? The Army Corps says, how do I do it from an engineering cost-effective way? The state says, wait, how do you do it in a way that doesn't negatively impact the resource we're responsible for protecting? So it's that whole spectrum, and that's why the partnership is so incredible. You've got everybody working together to answer these questions so that this can be replicated. We can't have an incredibly expensive, difficult project and expect it to replicate it. Our job is to try to figure out how this is something that can become commonplace. The only way we're going to make a difference on a bigger scale is to be able to replicate this. And it's not the right solution for everything. There are some marshes we shouldn't mess with. We have those conversations all the time. You fix a marsh after it's completely failed. You fix a marsh that's failing but hasn't failed yet. Do you get ahead of the curve? I'm not going to advocate fixing a marsh that doesn't need it, because we don't have enough, right? But those are important questions, and it gets back to what's success. Do I spend my time there, or is it not cost effective because it's already lost, and I'm better off over here? I don't have answers for that yet. This is pretty early in the game, and I'll submit to you the amount of progress that's been made over the short period of time that this has been happening is pretty phenomenal. And it's because I think folks get it that doing nothing is causing harm. What do we have to lose? And I don't want to say that, in a cavalier way that says we don't have anything to lose. Sure, we have things to lose, but it changes the metric of the risk model, I think. And I think that when folks really more globally started realizing what the loss levels are and what we stand to lose, that the ability to experiment and get some of this done and still do it right. I mean, there's no question. You got to do it right, and it's the number of scientists here, the number of engineers that are here working on this, asking this. We've got enough data now, and it's enough of a place that more and more folks are trying to come in because where can you study that? Where can you do that? And it's tech transfer. Monica's all over the world talking about this stuff. We have to figure out who we're talking to to manage the requests for information that we're getting. And that's why this is going to be an incredible opportunity for folks to really see how this can work. We're hoping that municipalities will learn more so they're more, interested in maybe it's a little bit more risk than just trucking it off. But at Stone Harbor, that didn't work so well, right? So they're presumably, and it was really expensive, right? Yeah.
I'm sorry to ask so many questions.
No,
but is there an unending supply of dredge material? Because the corollary to that is that, is there something else that's easier to spew, easier to spray, that helps to build the...
Yeah, there's not an unending supply, I guess. As long as we want to maintain our waterways, right, that's going to be necessary. So no, there's not an unending supply, but that is the appropriate, material to use. Because remember, it has to be something the marsh wants to have. The material that's being dredged is largely material being eroded off of the marshes. If it's sandy, it's coming from the beachfront around back, right? We're getting more material in the, so part of the reason that channel's filling is because of the beach fill. And if you put all that sand on the beach, it's gonna whip around the corner and come back around, and that's you're gonna keep running around. So the sandy stuff at the inlets that's sweeping back in is coming from that. But the rest of the muddy stuff that's back in here is coming, all that water getting up on the marsh, when it drains off the marsh, it's eroding the marsh. So it's a double-edged sword. The marsh is going down and the bottom's coming up. So we're kind of driving it. So there'll be an unending supply of dredge material pending the fact that somebody's going to continue to think we need to maintain our waterways, whether that's the state, the federal government, or municipalities, or even private homeowners. Right? The Stone Harbor Manor folks, that was private. They dredge their private dollars.
And I think there's lots of good internship research projects.
Lots of research projects. We're not going to run out of things to study and ask about and learn about and help continue. Again, our goal is to do it the best way we can, adaptively manage when we think we can do something better, and keep asking those questions to try to do the right thing. Yep.
Can you talk about the sources of funding?
So this, so the Army Corps maintenance dredging is what is funding these particular projects. There's grant funding for some of the research pieces that are happening here. A lot of the monitoring work that we're doing is actually funded by private philanthropy from donors that are giving us that added a bit of availability to stay out there and do the work. It's expensive. It's, you know, every day we've got people out in the marsh looking at and listening and working on it. If it's a state channel, the state budget funds that for that. There's some money coming out of DEP for some of the management of their properties. But these big projects, the dredging itself is coming from the state or the federal government for the Army Corps dredging. Those are the big drivers for this. No question?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for all you're doing. I think we were losing a lot of habitat, and you guys kind of came out of the fun. As you know, so all your projects, you know,
Thank you. We appreciate it. A lot of hard work goes into it. Well, thank you. I'll stick around and talk to folks, but I know it's dinner time. All right. Thank you for coming. I appreciate it. There's literature on the back table if you've got it. Keep it.